Okay. Can you start with prayer? Is that all right?
Yes, of course.
Okay, thanks.
Our Father in heaven, we bow our heads before thee and we give thanks for this wonderful day that we have. We are grateful for all thou hast given us, and we are grateful for our membership in thy church. We are grateful that we can meet together as a group for this class with BYU Idaho, and we pray that thy Spirit will be with us, that we can discuss this case study, be inspired and directed by the Spirit, and that we can enjoy good health and continue to do well in our studies. And we pray for these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. That's appreciated much.
You're welcome.
Very much so. Rather than write down the instructions, I put them on my phone.
Oh.
So I'll be looking at my phone. Okay, so here's the quick synopsis of the case. 7 months after the Columbia accident, the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, or the CAIB, presented their report on the causes of the accident. The board pinpointed the technical cause of the accident. It also identified organizational issues within NASA dating back to decades. The CAIB also reported how manager might have behaved differently during the mission and stressed the organizational shortcoming at NASA that contributed to the catastrophe. They went back and did a board to find out what went wrong here. Why did 7 people die? It kind of made me mad when I read this case. I'm like, these people died, and had they communicated effectively, had it not been, I don't know, maybe I should withhold my opinions till the end of this discussion, but what's the issue that's going on here in this case? What caused the problem?
Well, definitely, I would agree. It appears that there was a lack of communication that was going on between everybody involved. I remember in the case study during the 16-day mission for Columbia, it mentioned that the group only met, they were supposed to meet together every single day, but I think they only met together a grand total of 5 times. Another issue that I noticed was it seemed that a lot of their equipment was out of date. They had cameras that were supposed to be monitoring the damage done by the debris, and a lot of those cameras were recording poor images, were in bad angles, and some of them weren't even recording at all. So it seemed like their equipment wasn't up to par as it should have been either. So things like this, I think, could have been rectified to help avoid the accident.
Yeah, I agree. And then the one woman that I got, her name was Linda. Oh, what was her last name? She was like the head honcho over it, and she just, all she cared about was, you know, we got to keep these missions going. We got to keep these missions going. And she didn't care, you know, even when it was suggested that the Columbia, when it returned safely, was going to need excessive, you know, repair time. She was kind of frustrated about that, you know, because all she wanted was to get that next mission out in order to, you know, prove that, justify the cost spent on the mission.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember her last name? I'm terrible with names.
Oh, I remember who you're talking about. I just didn't remember her last name.
Yeah, but her first name was Linda. I did remember that. So, yeah, the notes say that the issues are both technical problems and also organizational problems, which is true. Like the shuttle had the problems that it had, but also they possibly could have been corrected if the people within the organization had been more willing to work together.
Yes.
Why is it important to know what issues, what varying issues are taking place?
I think it would be important because there are certain things that people within the group may see that others will not. So another reason why it's important to have an effective line of communication, because we can't see everything. And if we work together collectively, it helps us to be able to catch things that we don't see ourselves. Maybe another group member will catch.
Okay, very good. Yeah, that's true. I fully agree with that. And then in the notes, it also says that if you understand, it's kind of like, there's that famous quote that says, those who don't learn their history will oftentimes repeat it. Along the same lines, in this case, if you understand what went wrong, then you can prevent that failure from happening in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so this wants us to talk about the recovery window. It says there's a time period between a threat and a major accident or prevented accident, in which, you know, there's only a certain window of time in which action is possible in order to prevent that threat from happening or prevent that accident. So what was the recovery window in this particular case?
Well, they had the 16-day mission, right? I think it was at the end of the period that they were supposed to be ready to launch. So I guess it wasn't a huge window, 16 days, but I guess in theory, since they've had other successful launches, maybe they thought that was enough time of a window.
You're correct about the period of launch. I would actually, I might argue, you're right, it is 16 days. That's what, because the case study, it says the recovery window in this case was the time between when the problem of the foam strike was discovered after launch to the day the Columbia exploded. So that would be 16 days. You would be correct. I would argue, though, that they had clues that the foam was having problems, like in all their previous missions.
Oh, yeah.
And so I would argue and say, you know what, no, this was a problem way before that mission ever started. You know, they downgraded it to where it wasn't a threat. They weren't concerned about that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I guess maybe that's not a very good argument, because people could argue, well, there's always something that can go wrong. So if it's not really that big of a threat, then why would you even consider like visiting it? Because you can essentially spend your whole time worrying about potential threats and never get launched at all, and then you could miss out on all the other missions that went correctly, you know. So I mean, there's some truth in that. So I don't know, maybe my thoughts aren't good, but for sure your thought 16 days during that mission, they should have done something and they didn't do it.
Yeah.
The next section was on it talks about downplaying ambiguous threats. So it wanted us to discuss what are human cognitive biases and how do they apply in this case. So for a review, cognitive biases are systematic errors in judgment. They're like, you know, whenever people make a decision and their decision is wrong, that decision could be wrong because they were biased in one way or another. So it lists a couple of those biases. There's what's called a confirmation bias, and that's our tendency to look for information that confirms our existing views. So yeah, so we will see things that support our viewpoint as opposed to what else says. Mm-hmm. So and then there's the sunk cost bias, which is what I think Linda's problem was here, which is our tendency to escalate commitment to a course of action into which we have already invested time, money, or other resources. Well, Linda was on board with the whole NASA program. They had already dumped so much money in. They had already promised, you know, 10 missions was a year. And if she didn't keep on course, then their per mission cost was going to be way higher, and she wasn't performing. So they'd already invested billions of dollars into this program, and so she clearly had a sunk cost bias where she was not willing to see the potential dangers or threats because it would interfere with the bottom line overall. Yeah. Do you remember reading about sunk costs and confirmation, like about biases?
Well, I don't know.
It wasn't a part of it.
I don't know if this is really 100% correct, but along the same lines of like Linda's biases, I even kind of noticed the scientists and everyone working on for NASA, they were receiving a lot of scrutiny and pressure from the government to get it going. In fact, I remember reading like it was the Office of Management and Budget was really putting a lot of pressure on them to get the shuttle mission going. And again, it almost seemed like, you know, with the issues with the cameras, that even if they've already invested so much money, that more money should have been put into place if they insisted on continuing the space exploration program. So I think in this case, the Office of Management and Budget of the government could also be responsible or show signs of that type of bias.
Well, I agree. Absolutely. Good for pointing that out. Yeah, so that kind of, you already answered the next question, which was what evidence is present in this case of some of these biases? And we already talked about, Linda, and then what you said about that Office of Budget Management. The case says, here's some other examples. At the flight readiness review meeting, senior NASA managers concluded that the foam shedding was an acceptable risk. Each safe return of a shuttle, despite numerous foam strikes, affirmed management's beliefs there was a low risk of failure. So they were kind of relying on previous history. Just because it didn't cause a problem before, it's not going to cause a problem now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that showed a bias too, is based on previous history, it wasn't going to be a problem. So yeah. Okay. The next question, what is shared cognitive framing? The answer is, do you know what the answer is?
I don't know what that is now.
Yeah. Shared cognitive framing is frameworks, beliefs, and assumptions that help us simplify a complicated reality. And frameworks, beliefs, and assumptions that help us simplify a complicated reality. So the next question is, what evidence is present in this case of cognitive framing? So I would think, the whole NASA framework, they all work together, all these different departments. You look at the diagram at the end of the case, so there's like over a dozen different departments comprising NASA, and they're all having to, they're experts in their one field, but they're having to come together all as one. And then it talked about, the one guy that was saying, that kept saying there's a danger, the Roca guy. Mm-hmm. He wanted to bring in outside sources. So they had outside assembly forces for the rockets. They had outside analyst forces to measure their safety. They had like all dozens of groups that were supposed to be coming together to put this rocket together. But it all showed that they all had, they were just having trouble working together. So this answer, it says NASA viewed their program as an operational rather than experimental endeavor, which causes higher risk decision making. Sense, because they had problems they still needed to work out. It was still in the early experimental stages, and they still went forward, even though they didn't fully investigate this could be a problem. I think that question's really confusing.
Yeah, I kind of.
NASA still.
But one thing I just kind of thought of when it was mentioning, I guess, looking at certain things and then coming up with a simple conclusion, like you said before, I think even just presenting this case study to us students is an example of that. Because, I mean, obviously none of us are scientists, and what we can read this case study and kind of point out the things that seem obvious to us that they did wrong, that they should have been able to catch. So I think having that outside help of people who may not be specific experts, but at least can understand the importance of a group work would be really important.
That's a very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, very, very true. Very true. Yeah. Okay. Next question then. When did the problems with Columbia begin?
Well, I guess you can say it started with the first day of the 16-day mission, but also I like how you mentioned before there was several other examples of shuttle missions that went awry, like Challenger, some of the other ones that were mentioned in the case study. So I think if you didn't fix the mistake before, then it was never fixed before. So I guess you can say it started as far back as then.
Yeah, it's true. I was in first grade, I think, when I remember watching it in school. Like we were, anyways, yeah, I'm older than you. Yeah. Why did the debris strikes become an acceptable risk? Is because they had it before in the previous missions, and
Yeah.
they concluded, oh, they always made it back safely. You know, it's gonna not be a problem this time either.
Yeah, I agree with that.
You have anything to add, possibly?
No.
Okay. What do you think is the root of the situation here with the Columbia mission?
I guess it could be part of the bias, like you said. It could also be simply thinking that everything is fine when it's not, that it worked before, or the shuttles came back okay, even if there was some damage. So things like that, I guess, not being humble enough to understand or try and fix some of the mistakes that had been made.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that one woman, Linda's emphasis on we gotta, you know, keep to a tight schedule and not really spend the time evaluating safety, had a lot to do with it too.
Mm-hmm.
How would you characterize the culture of NASA? What are some strengths and some weaknesses? I do think a strength is, you know, they did have a, maybe it's not a strength, maybe it's a weakness. So many times strengths are also weaknesses. So they did have a strict like reporting guidelines where you have to go through proper channels if you're going to request anything or receive help from anyone. So that was why there wasn't more in-depth work done on how much damage from the foam strikes was there actually done, because the guy was inexperienced and he didn't go through proper channels, so it was dismissed. So in that case, it really hurt the Columbia, but normally I think there does have to be order through proper channels. It's like why you, for example, you have to call the executive secretary if you need an appointment with the bishop, because
Mm-hmm.
the bishop can't have people constantly calling him all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you do have to follow proper channels. So I think, I don't know, it kind of hurt and helped. Well, in this situation, it hurt that it wasn't done through proper channels. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree that it's a strength for NASA to have those channels, but unfortunately, if we don't exercise our strengths, they become weaknesses. So as we saw, they had everything it's set up in place, they just weren't doing it right.
Very well put. Thank you for clarifying what I was trying to say. Very good, Albert.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think the culture is also one of government bureaucracy. I can't remember if it was this class or another class this semester where we read about just how much. Oh, it is in this class. Is in our book that we just read, that we just finished reading. It talked about government bureaucracies and how much, in the Speed of Trust book, just how much government bureaucracies cost organizations.
Oh, yeah.
How much money they have to spend in getting through all the government red tape. So I think that certainly harmed the Columbia's mission as well, is because there's so many processes you have to go through in order to follow it, that it costs way so much time and money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we've already covered the people in the case that were important to contributors to the mission's failure. There was a video that it had me watch, and it's really sad. It's just under 3-minute video. If you go into the group discussion leaders for this week, it shows the video link, and it shows like the people in the command center, and it shows the actual people and their reactions when they lost and they knew that they were dead. And there was a guy that had a headset on, and it just shows like tears streaming down his face, crying at the loss of these people, because he recognized that, you know, it was his fault that these people were dead. Kind of emotional.
Yeah, really sad.
Linda's definitely accountable because she chose to ignore the risks. I'd go a step further that I don't, Roca, I think he was not accountable. He was the only one that would, he's at the opposite end of the spectrum. He's the one that raised the red flag and said, hold it, guys, we're going to have a problem here. So you have to appreciate people like that will be willing. But there was the guy that he reported to that said, I'm not going to be a Chicken Little, I'm not going to call. But
No,
there were so many. Yeah, he said the Rocha guy had reported to him, and he went back and said, no, I'm not going to be a Chicken Little and go, we already discussed this and we're not going to go into it again. So I think that guy was at fault. I think that like you said, that the team, so many people were at fault. But yeah. I think that Linda was probably the most and then it talks about psychological safety. I know we've read about this a little bit this semester. Being able to express your opinion freely and feel like you're heard. You remember learning about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that they were in a psychologically safe place in the environment of NASA? Do you think that they were free to express their opinions or no?
I don't think they were, and we gone over some of the reasons to indicate why not, which is unfortunate. So, I mean, had they been, I think it's possible that the tragedy could have been avoided.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, we're rehashing. Okay, so is there any way that you can apply what was learned from this NASA case to your own life, personal, like to your personal experience? Yeah, do you have any personal experiences where you can relate to this case, or also business experiences in your workforce?
Well, the idea of having the proper equipment is always important in business. I mean, obviously the technology is always advancing, so we want to try and make sure we're up to date. Again, going through the proper chain of command and utilizing the tools that we have. As we mentioned, NASA, it appears that they had them, but they weren't really utilizing them properly. It could almost be a reflection of our own personal lives for our testimony. That yes, if we have a testimony, but if we're not exercising it and looking to strengthen it, then we could lose it. So I think there's several parallels between this case study and professional life and our personal lives as well.
Very good, thank you. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Words aren't coming to my mind. But,
no problem.
And all right. So, can you think of any other principles from this week's lessons reading that can apply to this case?
Well, just again, remembering the importance of working together as a group to follow through and do what you are planning to do as a group, and then to obviously make sure that everyone in the group is able to share what they're feeling and what they've learned and what can be applied to the project in order to improve it and make it better.
Very good. Yeah. I agree. So in short, we read this meeting will be shorter, obviously, because Ruby's not here. I will plan to post the link to the proper place for our group, and hopefully Ruby can come back and read through the case or watch the video, and that will help her to get a participation grade. But yeah, we talked today about everything that went wrong in the NASA case and how proper communication between all the different departments in NASA may have prevented the deaths of the 7 astronauts. And we also talked about how the recovery window, they should have done more to figure out what the problem was and possibly how to switch it during that recovery window, and they didn't. So, you have any other comments, Albert?
No, not at this time. I think we covered it pretty well. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for showing up, and
You're welcome.
sorry I seem a little out of it, but but I'm happy that we could meet and talk about this case. So thank you for coming, and
Oh, of course.
We'll catch you next Thursday. Does that sound good?
Yeah, I think next Thursday, next week, I'm the group leader. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. So, all right, if you'll plan on that next Thursday, then we will meet then. So thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. Okay.
All right, thank you. Bye.